Hi, and welcome to VFX Tutors. I'm Josh, and in this tutorial we're going to be continuing with building our set scan from photogrammetry using Metashape, or whether if you've used Meshroom to create this scan. So in this tutorial we're going to be using Maya, but you can use any 3D software. All we're going to be doing is modelling around our scan to create a low-res, more optimised version. Then we'll project our textures back onto it. So we have our scan from our previous ones now. So on the previous one tutorial, we scaled and orientated our scan to the correct size. So now in this one, we're going to start building the geometry. So the first thing that I'm going to do is just start with the ground plane. I'm just going to create a plane up in poly modeling. Just going to select plane here, and it should make a plane 2 here. I'm going to press R. I'm just going to scale it up. Because we orientated our scene directly to the origin, everything that we create is going to be created in the center, which is really useful, and it makes it a lot easier for your modeling. So I've just scaled up this plane. So what I'm going to actually do, if I go to my attributes editor here, go to my polyplane, and maybe we can reduce the subdivisions. We may not need that many, so let's actually just go for like a 6x6. It's up to you. You can do a more subdivision, but I'm just going to keep it fairly low res. And I'm also going to scale it up to sort of my working area, because I don't need all of this. So probably, because when I shot this, the whole sort of idea was the sort of let me show you. It was all filmed in this area, so like this. So I only really needed the scan for this much, but I made sure that I scanned a lot more just in case. So we don't need to model everything, because you only really want to model what you need, so you don't end up wasting a lot of time on things that you didn't really need to do. So I am going to probably scale it up to about there. And yeah, so I'm just going to model everything up to the edges here. You feel free to model all of it if you want, but for this case, this is not a hard surface modeling tutorial. It's more of just how to get your low res geometry and project your textures. So we're going to start with the floor first, because it's going to be the easiest. And we've basically got most of this already. The only thing that we really need to do is sort this edge out, because it kind of tilts up a bit. So I'm going to go to my modeling toolkit, and select multi-cut. I'm just going to add an extra subdivision here. And what I can do, I'm going to just select my vertices. So you can use your sort of spider selections, your web selections, whatever they're called, and you can go to vertex, edge, or object mode. But I always find if you go to your modeling toolkit and just select them up here, it's actually a lot faster. So I'm just going to select my vertices, press W. I'm just going to raise it up until I start seeing the geometry. And obviously this is on a slope, so what I can do, I'm just going to pick one of the ends. So this is coming up, so I'm just going to select that next vertex and I'm going to bring that down. And I'm just going to do that for all the other ones. And I'm just trying to get the geometry on top of the scan as close as possible. So if we look around, we can sort of see we've got some areas where it sort of doesn't quite come up. So we can select the vertex, hold V for snap, and just select only the Y translation. And then just drag it back to the place where you picked up the vertex. then it will just snap to that position. We can use quad draw for this, but this is probably quicker. Just to select your vertice, hold V, and just snap the Y translation on the vertice, because it's not on all of them. So I'm only doing it in the Y, because you don't want to change, because we want to try and keep this nice uniform grid. So I'm just going to do it to the areas that need it. So this is why I kind of kept it not super high subdivision, because then doing this per vertice might take a while. Then you would want to use a quad draw, because that would just be a lot quicker, and then you can just relax it to the geometry. But for this case, it's that's pretty much it. Let's do this one here. And this basically our goal is just to get this as modeled as tight to the scan as possible. Cool. So that was pretty quick, but if we just select our object mode here, we can see our geometry is pretty much right on top of the scan. So for our ground plane, I'm pretty happy with that, and it's really the only area I need. And it's got nice tidy geometry, so if you're using it for your wireframes, it's going to look really nice. So once you're happy with it, I'm just going to rename it. Just going to call it ground plane geo. Then we're going to move on to our next thing. So I'm going to start on this pillar here, and we're going to model around this. So I'm just going to go up to my poly modeling and select polycube. Then you can just scale, use the R to scale it up, then W to move it. And I'm just going to roughly place it here. And I can either scale it to try and fit, or I can just use select polyface, or hold right click and select faces. So I'll probably be using the modeling toolkit more, but if you don't have that, you can just use the face, right click and hold face, because this is just easier. It's just a lot quicker. And I can just select the faces. I'm just going to roughly sort of get that shape. And when you're modeling from scans, you might come to bits which are like this, and it's kind of like, well, that's not really anything great there, but because you've got the texture, you can sort of almost guesstimate where it is. So you're not always going to have amazing scans. Like, you'll have parts which are not so great. But now I've just selected my edges, and I'm just going to do some extra tweaks to the edges to try and get that really on top. Cool. So I've got pretty much most of that nicely sort of placed. Now we can sort of see we've got this bevel on each of the corners. So we can select each of these edges. And then we can go to our modeling toolkit, and we can select bevel, and we can change the fraction to sort of change the width between the bevel. We can't quite get it perfect because it's probably not. This is like an even bevel on the geometry, but on the actual scan it's not. So what we can do is select our edges. I'm just going to go around, select all of them. I'm going to press R. Just going to scale it in one direction until it meets up with this edge. Then what I'm going to do, I'm going to select all the other ones. So because I'm doing them all together, it's keeping it like it's keeping it all uniform. So it is a little bit soft there, but cool. Pull it in slightly. So now we've got our sort of rough shape around the edge. I'm going to select our vertices. I'm just going to select all the top ones. And then I'm going to pull it all the way up. I'm just going to adjust it because we pull direct, because we've aligned our ground as if it's perfectly flat, which is probably not. This is actually probably going up a slope. Our pillars will probably be not perfectly straight, because ideally this is obviously ramping up, but we've kind of treated it like it's not. So I'm just gonna select these vertices. I'm just gonna pull it in a little bit tighter so we get a nice sort of wrapping around the scan. Just going to bring this bottom part up. So like I said, this is not going to be a sort of a full-on hard surface modeling tutorial. We're just going to be getting the basic modeling around a scan, and then because we're going to do some hard surface modeling tutorials at some point anyway, so this is good to get sort of basics going, I guess. So because I'm only using this for placement and depth, you can continue modeling from this and make it one large piece of geometry, but I'm actually not going to bother. I'm going to make these in two pieces because it probably doesn't matter that much. So I'm just going to name this to pillar geo, because I'm only using this for placement, possibly hold out geo, and yeah, mostly just like placing things in scene. So it doesn't matter if it's not the most perfect geometry, but the tighter we do get it to the scan, the better it will be. So I'm just going to create another cube. Just going to scale it up. And I'm just going to scale it up so it's poking out both sides. Then I'm going to go to my face tool, face selection, sorry. Then I'm just going to pull it until it sort of slowly starts to disappear into the wall, and do the same for the other side. So you can select your edges. And the closer you get this to the scan, the better your projection geo will be, projection textures will be. And obviously if you're using, when you're modeling stuff with really accurate geometry, you can also get away of using it as just hold out, which possibly means you may save time not having to roto something, which is nice. But it has to be pretty good. But most of the time you still want to roto stuff. It's just whether if you're in a rush or you just want a quick slap compensate. So I'm just going to push this to the edges. That's about there. I'm going to select my face. I'm going to press Ctrl E to extrude. I'm just going to drag this up to where it starts sloping up. I'm going to press Ctrl E again. And I'm only going to model up to it because I don't need anything further than that. As you can see, it's sort of come off, so I'm just going to bring that back on there. If I select my edge, double click my edge loop, let's bring that in. I'm going to go to my faces and then translate that up. So you just want to go around and just select your vertices, try and keep it as uniform as possible. But sometimes things just aren't built uniformly, so don't expect everything to be built perfectly, because they very, very rarely are. And you'll be surprised how many structures you build from scans and you're like, they're a bit wonky. Cool. So now we're going to do the other side. I'm going to select the face. You can select the face in here, you can't see it. I'm going to press Control E. Just translate it out. And I think that goes up to about there. Then I can select the edge, vertices and just move them up until it matches this angle. I'm just going to select all my vertices and push them in. And we can see that's working quite nicely. And we've got, it's fairly quick to do. We can see our outlines working really well already. So what we can do, let's just actually have a look at this. So it does come out a bit there. So let's select our faces. I'm just going to bring it up a little bit. We don't need it, it's just so it goes over. I'm going to select multi-cut. And I'm going to hold Control to make an edge loop. And I'm going to pick a spot where I can sort of see this edge. I'm just going to make an edge loop there. So now we can see it. So now if I go to up here, select that edge, select all that edge loops, and I can deselect that one on the end because I don't really need to extrude that one out, and deselect that one. So now I have both sides. In all honesty, I don't really need this side, but I'm just going to do it uniformly anyway. And I'm going to press Control E, and you can either select translate, and you can see which adding this sort of edge here, which you can't quite see in some of the other bits, but possibly that it does slope down on the roof as well. So I've just used the local translate. Then I'm just going to go to my vertices, and I'm actually going to select them all. I'm just going to bring it down a bit. Just going to check all these edges, see if they're kind of... I'd imagine it's fairly flat, so it shouldn't be wildly off. We've just got this section here, which kind of seems a bit odd, so we will multi-cut. Add a edge loop there. Then I'm going to select all the vertices, just bring it down a bit. It's quite possibly the roof could be bowing at that point, which is, or it could just be something structural, who knows. There might be a reason why it's a little bit curved. Cool, so let's just do that one. Let's keeps going through the geo. So we can see what we've done here. We've sort of built this edge. If we just go back to our object mode, if we press Control 1, we can isolate. We can sort of see what we've made. I'm not too bothered at the top bit. It's kind of a bit funky because we're never going to see it. So don't worry about that. And I'm just going to keep these as two separate pieces of geo because I'm not that bothered. It's only projection stuff and to keep in the space. To find out where to place things in space, sorry. So I'm just going to select my edges. I'm just going to select my edges. I'm just going to bevel everything. Just so it's not just sharp edges. So select all the edges. I'm just going to select bevel. I'm just going to go around and check that I've not missed any edges. I'll deselect those by accident. We're still. Control 1. Let's double check it's not doing anything crazy. Cool. So we can do is select our vertices and we can try and bring this in a little bit tighter now. Cool, so we've roughly done that. If we just go back to our object mode, and you can see that we've got two here. So we can just duplicate this across now, but we also have to UV this at the end. So we're better off trying to, we can UV that when we come to the UVing part, we can UV this one, then duplicate it. Then we can do some sort of minor adjustments instead of having to duplicate it, then UV it. It's just a little bit easier to fix it, model it that way. So we're gonna leave that one as it is, and then do this one after we in the UVing stage, because we can just duplicate it. Cool. So also, if you want, we can let's actually, if we press one, we can actually delete these faces. We don't need those faces, and it will make it easier because we will go through and we can bevel those as well, just to make it a little bit softer. Cool, and it'll just look nicer in the end. Just pull this up so that's well and truly in that geometry. Cool. So I'm quite happy with that side. So we've done one pillar on one side. So we can move on. Let's do this wall. So the same again. In fact, let me just call this pillar 2 geo. And I'm going to make a polycube. Scale it up so I can see it. Then I'm just going to translate it up against that wall. I'm going to press F to center on the object. And what I can do, select my faces. It doesn't matter if you've got stuff poking through, because we know that this isn't joined, because if you follow this down, this actually starts to open up to the ground floor. So I'm just going to select my face, and I'm going to start with one end. I'm going to go all the way up to where I've got the edge of my ground plane. I'm just going to match the top first because I can see that the most. Then I'm going to do the same this side. Just going to bring it all the way down to the edge of this plane. Bring it in, then match the height. So we can sort of see that's almost working quite well. But it's kind of not so great in the middle. So what we can do is use our multi-cut. I'm just going to use the hold control and left click to make a loop. And I'm going to do it on these joins, because it just seems the most logical place to place them. And I'm going to select my vertices. Press W, I'm going to slightly push it out. Do that for both bits. And select my face. Select all the back ones, just pull it out because I'm seeing the vertice here, so I imagine it goes out a little bit further. In fact, we should be able to see here. Well, no, we don't. But it's fine. We've got it fitting really nicely now. So I'm actually going to do this because this is going to make it a lot easier for when we UV it, and we don't need it. So we can actually delete these end ones. And I'm going to delete those back ones. Because these ones, when we look at it, and we'll do the same to the pillar, because we've got some stuff up there that we don't need. And like, everything else behind it is wasted. So we want to make this as optimal as possible, otherwise we're going to end up UVing things that we don't need. So I probably can actually delete those as well. Don't need that. Select my edge. Press Control 1. I'm going to just put it down. So now all I need to do is double click on this, and I can select bevel. Change my fraction, segments, until it sort of matches nicely. Maybe even bring this down as touch. Cool. So I'm quite happy with that. We'll call that the lower wall geo. And not before we go any further, let's actually sort this out because we've got a lot of stuff on here we don't need. So I'm just going to go to my faces, select all those faces, then deselect that, just press delete, and I'm also going to do the same here. I'm going to select let's select this edge here and delete. Select that one and delete. Now if I double click on the top, I can delete all that. So now we've not got all this sort of wasted geometry that we're going to use. So if I select my edges, and this will make it a lot easier to UV as well. I'm just going to scale that so it's flat. I'm just going to pull it up because it's going to be hidden. So I have to press 1. See, it's made absolutely no difference to it apart from we've now not got all this wasted geometry. We could almost delete all this, but it's fine. Cool, so now we've done that, we can now, let's select our object mode. We can probably duplicate this up, or we can make a new one. I've got a feeling this may not have the same sort of bevel on it. So I am just going to make a new polycube. Because sometimes it's easier to start from scratch, or just start from a cube. And I'm going to do the same again. Press F to center on your model that you've made. I'm going to do the same again. I'm just going to push it till it disappears. I'm going to select my face in the modeling toolkit, or you can right click and go to face mode. I'm just going to do the same again. Translate it all the way so it's the same here. Just going to put it into the meats. Then I'm going to drag it down. I'm going to do the same for the other end. Just press F to center on it. Cool. So that's pretty good. So now what I need to do is select my lower face underneath, and I can just pull this all the way down till it meets the scan. And it looks pretty good. What I'll also do, where I'll make some, if I go to multi-cut, make some, if you press Control left click to make the edge loop, just going to make edge loops where the joins are, because this is probably where most likely the sort of different angles are going to be. So I would imagine that these are solid, pre-cast concrete sort of blocks. And yeah, they're not going to be perfectly straight. There's going to be a certain amount of human error in there. So I'm actually going to go to my component, I'm going to select this. I'm actually going to go to my edges on that. And so if I isolate with Control 1, just going to pull this out so it's definitely going over. Cool. So go back to that part. So that's working really well. So I press Control 1 again. It's up to you if you want to delete the stuff. I'm gonna do it because it just keeps everything really like nice and optimized. And it just means that we're not wasting, not that we're going to be using a lot of UV space anyway. It just means that we're working really like optimized for our modeling. And it's just stuff that we don't need unless you're really seeing around it. So in fact, let's undo that. Let's keep that bottom bit. Just because there is a slight bit under there. Just going to select my edges, double click on that edge, double click on that edge. So now I've got those edge loops selected. I'm just going to go to bevel. And sometimes you can't, you might just have to type it in. Go to my edges. I'm just going to readjust it. Cool. I'm pretty happy with that, so I'm just going to rename that to upper wall geo. So now we've got this pipe, and we can do that with making a cylinder. So I'm going to select cylinder from the poly modeling. Just scale it up, and you can bring it over. press F to center on it. And you can see it's pretty big at the moment, so we can scale this down to roughly fit. And also if we go to our attributes editor and select our poly cylinder, we don't need 20 sides. We can probably bring this down to 8. Then we can go to our modeling toolkit, select vertices. I'm just going to select all the vertices and do the same again. Just going to drag it all the way to the edge of where we're modeling. I'm just going to match it at one end. Then do the same to the other end. Just press F to center on it. Cool, so we got that pretty nicely lined up. That's working pretty well. So we're just going to call this upper pipe geo. So now the next step would be to, as we're working with this cylinder, let's do the railings. So I'm actually just going to Control D, duplicate that, drag it up. I'm going to press R to scale it, and I'm going to pick a point where I can sort of see the clearest representation of how big this rail is. Because sometimes you won't have the geometry, but you can sort of guesstimate in the texture. So I'm going to do the exact same thing with the ends. I'm going to select the vertices, and I'm just going to roughly get them in place. Try and get them as. Sometimes you're going to have like, oh, what's this geo here? It's not great. But you can sort of get it working quite nicely. Pull that all the way up to there. Just press F to center onto it. And you can sort of see how crazy this geometry is. Cool. So we can kind of guess that it's not perfectly straight. So let's go to our multi-cut, and I'm going to Control left click. I'm going to make edge loops on every section where there's a post. So let's just Control left click with multi-cut. I'm going to deselect it, and in my vertex mode, I'm just going to go through and I'm going to adjust all of them so it sort of roughly looks correct. And I'm only adjusting it in the Y because this geo is not great, and I imagine it's probably just bent from in that axis, not so much forward and backwards. So I'm quite happy with that. I'm going to rename that to rail top geo. I'm actually just going to Control D again. I'm going to duplicate this down. I'm just going to translate it down. I'm going to do the exact same thing. Select my vertices, and hopefully they're roughly in the correct place anyway. They might slightly be off. Most of them seem pretty good. Cool. I'm just lower. So now we just need to do these vertical parts. So I'm just going to create another cylinder. Press R and just scale it up so I can see it. Then I can just hold V to snap, and I'm going to just snap it to a place here. So I can just scale it down, or I can select one of these cylinders, and I can see that my uniform, obviously you can see my scale Y is higher, so that's obviously the length, and my actual thickness of it is 1.558. So I'm just going to select that. So please go 1.558. So now that's the exact same circumference as these cylinders. Then all we have to do is go to our tribute editor and change this to 8 as well. And now I can just scale this up, translate it till it fits. So I'm going to do that for all the others. I'm not too worried about the geometry. I just want to get this sort of blocked out. Like I say, this is not a full-on hard surface tutorial. It's just to get you going with creating your own scans and set geo. And making geometry so you can have nice wireframe renders. But also for your other projects as well. You're not going to be using this just for the match move stuff, you're doing other stuff. You really want to spend time doing this because when you go into the layout phase, I think it's nice to have some really good geo to place things in the scene. So just duplicate the same thing, same pole over and over. I'm more focused on getting them aligned with the poles than I'm using the sort of reference for the texture on the scan, then sort of aligning them to the poles. This is our last one. Cool. Let's group that, and we'll just call that Rail Verts Geo. Cool. So what we can do, let's just go to our channel box editor. Let's just hide our scan, and we can see what we've made already. We say we've got some pretty good geometry already. Just like it's basic, but it's accurate, which is good. So what we can do next is, there's not much detail for these roof section parts, but we can still do it anyway. So let's create a cylinder, a cube. What we can do is, because we don't need this to be honest, but let's do it anyway. And what we'll do, we'll pick ones that sort of show us the most. So I think it's quite hard to tell because there's not much detail. Probably should take some, if I was to do this properly, I'd have definitely taken more photos of the roof. But because it wasn't really a concern, or didn't really need it, I didn't do it, but it doesn't matter. So I'm actually going to measure it up. Nope. Let's do this bit here. say, we're not going to see this, but let's just do it anyway. I'm going to select my faces. So I'm just going to translate it all the way to the end. Go through. I'm going to do the same for this end. And I think they do definitely dip down, so I'm going to make a edge loop with multi-cut. Slightly translate that down. Cool. So if I press Control 1 and isolate that, I'm going to do the same again. Select this face and delete those because I just don't need them. I'm going to select my edges. I'm just going to bevel those just so it's not so harsh. Press Control 1. And we can sort of slightly adjust this as well. So because these are, we'll do the same thing with the UVs as well. Shall we, or we can just do them and UV them in the end. There's a lot of them. We'll duplicate these once we've UV'd them. Although because we're making everything from a polycube anyway, there will be the UVs will still kind of be there, but we'll just have to sort of unfold them. So I'm just going to pull this up. And say I'm fairly happy with that. And we can, once we've UV'd it, we can duplicate it. So we'll just call it ceiling. I don't know what these are, partitions. And what I'll do, I'm just going to do something for the lights. I'm just going to do something really basic. I'm going to actually make a sphere, because you might actually need them, because you can use them as mesh lights if needed. I'm going to go to my UV editor, change my subdivisions down to maybe like 12 by 12. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to right click and select my faces, or you can go to your modeling toolkit. Delete half of them. Select it. And then I'm also going to delete that edge loop. Select my edges. Just Control E and translate that. Then I'm going to do the same here. Control E. Then I'm going to go to my I'm going to press Ctrl D to duplicate it. Then you can see I'm translating in the X. So if I just go to my X and minus, add a minus to it, then I'll flips it. And I can just bring that in close. Select both of them with Ctrl Shift. Go to Mesh and Combine. So now I've made this one mesh. So if I go to my modeling toolkit, select my edges, my vertices. If I select all those middle ones, you go to Edit Mesh and Merge. You might have to change your distance threshold. I kind of like to cut up to, it depends on if it's a large scene, you can just scroll up to 1. But if it's really small, you might have problems with this. But now we've sort of, you can see it's kind of gone a bit. What's happened here? So funny's gone there. Let's delete that. I think I might. Let's go to our vertex face and check we've not accidentally done a double extrude. Should be fine. Let's just use target world. That wasn't the best explanation. So I'm going to select all those again. Edit mesh and merge. Just select this, hold V, and just snap it to that same one there. Cool. So we've just made this really basic shape, which is now going to be our light. So it doesn't have to be anything fancy. We can hold V, snap it to our light, and we can just press R and scale it down. Obviously, if you want to make a much nicer one, you can. I just want to make something really basic for the projection. Now I can just translate this all the way up to here. But actually, I can select this middle loop and delete that. Just going to bring it all the way up to here. I'm going to sort of scale this. More to fit the shape of the light. So it doesn't matter too much. You can spend some more time making this a better light, but just sticking with it, keeping it basic at the moment. Cool. And we'll also save duplicating for later as well, once we've done the UV. So we'll just call this, actually let's go to Edit, Delete by Type History, so that gets rid of history, and we'll just call this Light. So we've actually modeled everything we need to do for now. Apart from anything that we need to duplicate, but we're going to do that after we UV'd. So we're going to now move on to the next part, which is going to be UVing all our geometry. Then we'll duplicate it over. Then we're pretty much should be finished. Then we'll go head on to the projections. So if you've enjoyed this tutorial, hit that like button and subscribe for more like this.